Hi, my name is Sebastian van Baalen and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research. My current research focuses on civilian nonviolent action in civil war. Civilian action refers to acts by which unarmed people use nonviolent tactics and methods to try and influence governments, rebel groups and militias in the context of an ongoing civil war. Nonviolent tactics include many of the protest methods that we also hear about in more peaceful contexts, such as demonstrations, strikes, sit-ins, protest marches and boycotts. A famous example of civilian action in civil war was the Women in Peace network in Liberia, which organized protest marches, sit-ins and a sex strike to push the warring parties to the negotiation table. A common ingredient in civilian nonviolent action is a touch of humor or absurdity. One example from my own research on the Ivorian Civil War that has stuck with me was a sit-in by a local group of women. The women were protesting against rebel extortion and simply spent about 3 weeks singing off-key outside a rebel commander's house until he gave up and promised to lower the taxes at the local market. Acts such as these are much more common than most of us would expect. Civilian nonviolent action takes place in war zones across the world, even in areas where speaking up can be a matter of life and death. One study shows that about 1/4 of all protests in Africa in 1992 to 2013 actually took place in active war zones. Likewise, in my own work on the Ivorian Civil War, I've documented more than 400 civilian protests related to the war. Studying civilian nonviolent action in civil war is important. For the courageous people involved in these actions, doing something to resist violence and oppression often constitutes a way to maintain human dignity in the midst of a terrible situation. For me, studying these acts thus becomes a way to challenge the ways in which we think about civil war-affected societies. Studying civilian action is also important because we know that nonviolent action works. Research shows that nonviolent campaigns against authoritarian regimes are more likely to succeed than violent campaigns. Research on civil war, including some of my own, also shows that civilian action sometimes forces rebel groups to treat civilians better or pushes the warring parties to negotiate peace. For me, learning more about civilian action in civil war thus becomes a way to learn more about an alternative strategy to protect civilian life and dignity in civil war. Researching civilian action in civil war is rewarding, but also very difficult. One way to do so is to collect information from news sources and create large databases of civilian action. For my own work, I have spent weeks in Ivorian local newspaper archives to document protest events in rebel-controlled areas. Another way to study civilian action in civil war is to talk to the very people involved in such campaigns. One of my most memorable moments in my own research was, for instance, when I interviewed 2 proud truck drivers in Western Ivory Coast that went on strike to protest against the many rebel roadblocks. They told me that one of the reasons why they were successful was that the rebels depended on the truck drivers to make money from illegal logging. Talking to people involved in civilian nonviolent action can be an emotional roller coaster between laughing and crying. However, for me, doing this work serves as a stark reminder that even in the worst of circumstances, most people choose to make their voices heard without taking up arms. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to find out more about my research, you can visit the department's homepage and look up my profile page.